Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Spotlight on Security Tech Insights. Let's intro our topic a little bit here today. So, what does cyber insurance mean? Can it actually mean better enterprise security posture? Think about that for a minute while we ponder on this. Do you actually have cyber insurance as part of your security strategy for your enterprise, or maybe you're just thinking about it? What's changing with this approach that could be your path to ensuring a more secure infrastructure deployment? My name is Theresa Miller. I'm the Director of Technical Advocacy here at Cohesity, and today I am joined by one of a industry experts that I know of. We've done some work together in the past as well. Could you intro yourself?
Yep. I'm Patrick Coble. I'm the VDI hacker. I am a security nerd at VDISec, where we do penetration tests and security audits of deployments, small, medium, and jumbo extra large, and kind of everything around it, focusing on VDI security, Active Directory security, and I guess just security. So just security nerd stuff.
Well, that's what makes you perfect for this topic. And when we were trying to figure out what to talk about, I was super excited when you suggested cyber insurance. So let's dive in. Why cyber insurance?
Yeah, most depending on what line and industry you're in, you may be legally required to buy some, and it's going to be based on your gross profits and a couple other factors: employee size, number of IPs out there. And its ultimate goal is that when something bad happens, it can help soften the blow to your team for the unexpected budget stuff that's going to happen. Because when bad things happen, you most likely are going to hire somebody from the outside to do incident response, and it's going to be hundreds of dollars an hour, and it's going to take hundreds, if not even some cases thousands of hours of multiple people working on the same thing, depending on how big your deployment is, to find out what happened, how it happened, and then how to make sure it doesn't happen again. So that's the main thing, is that you may be required to have it. If you don't have it right now, you may be okay. I haven't seen any instances on the news where it actually saved someone from getting, the orange jumpsuit. But I think it would make you sleep a little bit better at night, to have some form of insurance versus none. And really, kind of no matter how big or small your business is, especially if you're managing your virtual machines in the cloud on in your data center, it's something you should look into.
I think it's really interesting to consider the fact that cyber attacks are so frequent now that we have to have this conversation to begin with.
Yeah.
It is a headline every single day. So, but I do think that for some organizations, if they're not required, maybe there's some skepticism around cyber insurance.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
so, is that something that we could talk about a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in some cases, they're just going to provide moral support and financial support when bad things happen, right? And depending on the insurance, they may actually use big names like Mandiant or something like that. May have a partnership with them. So when bad things happen, they've already got a $10,000 or $20,000 block of time already allocated when that time happens, so that there's no contractual holdups. Because if you said, I want someone to come look at my stuff, it may take you weeks or months to go through the contract process, depending on what kind of company you're at, right? To get the quote and the PO and the SOW and all that kind of stuff. So some of these companies will actually partner for that. So I think there is definitely skepticism, because in some eyes, people would rather spend that money on security products. And I would be in that boat most of the time. But then the amount of money fractional to your revenue, and the impact and loss per minute per day and bad PR is fractional to it. So it's like you could upgrade whatever your endpoint detection system is, whatever that AV system is, you could update it 2 or 3 tiers and spend the same amount of money that you would maybe on the insurance, right? Or buying a whole new solution from company A, B, and C, that does another layer of security. So I can get it, but to your point, it's in the news every single day. There's something bad happening all the time. And I think the biggest thing from what I've seen doing the consulting life of it is that the things I see don't end up on the news. And they're in giant, huge companies, Fortune 100, Fortune 10, Fortune 1000 companies, and companies smaller. And they don't end up on the news because they track it down to a point, and they spend a lot of time and say customer data was at access, patient data was at access, financial data was at access, right? They just exploited this one machine and then tried to scan the network and tried to do this. And then the buck stopped right there. So you don't hear a public disclosure. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these events from giant companies, small mediums, every single year that you don't hear about because they don't make the news. So the ones that make the news are just the tip of the iceberg, and the iceberg is much, much bigger and more complex when we talk about security incidents.
So one other thing on why cyber insurance. So I know that in talking with companies, sometimes one of the benefits of cyber insurance is that you are required to do a root cause analysis of an attack, and they'll really help you dive in and understand what happened. Is that your experience as well?
Yep. Some insurances, the more expensive insurance, are the ones that really do that. Some cheaper insurances are just going to help you financially and moral support, and they're not going to provide incident response or anything like that. But I think the big change that relates to that is that most cyber insurance policies don't just happen by, I want a cyber insurance policy for $1 million. Now they're doing, a DUI check. Have you been drinking today? Have you patched your servers? Have you patched your systems? Do you have firewalls? Do you have AV? Do you have multi-factor authentication? So they're asking those hard-hitting, fundamental core security questions before they give insurance now. Whereas just call it right before Bitcoin got hot as part of attacks, call it back in 2014, 15, and the edge of 16, insurance questions were, how much money do you make per year and how many employees? And do you have cybersecurity stuff like AV? And that was it. It was like 5, 6 questions. Now I just did one for a medium-sized client. It was over 70 questions, right? And if yes, answer why. If no, answer why. So it's got a lot more complex, and that is related to the risk of attacks are just going up and up. And I think it's something that's exponential. The more of our lives that are on this digital world, business and personal, the more attacks that are going to keep happening. So this insurance can help protect you in some ways. It's not perfect, just like you can't just buy one security product and think it's going to protect everything.
So I think that's actually a pretty significant change in cyber insurance, to know that it's not just a simple couple little questions to answer these days. It seems like maybe there's more accountability. Is there maybe anything else to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely, because before you would just attest to very simple questions. And now, I mean, it gets so granular that it'll come all the way down to like immutable backups, right? It'll go all the way to the end of knowing that if, let's say, ransomware being one of the very common attack vectors, is if ransomware happens in your deployment, they're going to say, do you have backups? Yes. Well, that's what they said, 10 years ago. Well, now they're going to say, is that backup immutable? Yes or no. Is it connected to the network? Yes or no. Is it Active Directory integrated? Yes or no. And then after that, has it been tested? How often do you test your backups and restores? So that one client, there were 7 questions just on backups alone, not counting AV and multi-factor authentication and phishing protection and all those types of things that are, also very foundational. But if it's going that deep on backups, that shows you that there have been so many companies that had to start from day 0 or day 413, and they've been in business for 20 years, right? So they just have a backup that's so old that it's not worth it, because in some cases of really bad attacks, they nuke the backups too, right? And so then this is where you can't do anything. So if they got to every system because you had just some bad dental IT hygiene, it goes everywhere. They encrypt all those systems. It's just game over, right? And then it's just like, hey, let's spin up a new this and new that. And all that time is money, right? And so That's where that cyber insurance can help, but it's not going to pay the bills. There are some very, very big insurance companies that will help pay revenue while you're lost, as long as you meet your RPOs and RTOs. But that's very fancy insurance that costs 7 to 8 digits to get into that world.
Interesting. What about disaster recovery or replication,
Yep.
endpoint protection? Do those fall into that criteria
Yeah.
checklist as
Yes.
well?
Yeah. So a lot of the insurance questions will also be about what kind of applications you have, how you host it, if it's external or internal, and then if it does have disaster recovery. Now, depending on what type of business you're in, the state or country you reside and work in may already have those requirements that you have to have some form of business continuity and backups as part of that. Others may be a little looser, but if you're like in the healthcare or finance world, or in the credit card side, PCI in that world, then yeah, you have to have all those things. And, endpoint protection is one of those must haves. The effectiveness of it is always going to vary. But the main thing that a lot of the insurances are going to ask is it a next gen antivirus? Is it a EDR, XDR, MDR? There's all this new security alphabet soup that you've got to decode, right? And then they're also going to ask about socks and stuff as part of that, right? To make sure that who's watching the things. Is it you, or is it you paying someone to watch those things? So yeah, it's definitely a big one.
So it's really interesting to see this change. I think one could assume, based on even what we decided we were talking about today, that cyber insurance, if you want it and you make sure that you're checking all the boxes on the list, you actually do get a better IT security posture out of this.
For sure.
So let's talk a little bit more about IT remediation. So, what are the most common IT remediations that come out of trying to get cyber insurance? What are
Yeah.
people passing up on that they shouldn't be,
Yeah.
to be cyber insurance ready, right? To be
I
able
think
to be
I think the
selected.
big one that stands out to most people is multi-factor authentication, right? Because in some cases we may have it just to log into our mail, but not to this website, or not to this business site, and not to this thing, or not to the VPN. So they're going to ask you questions: is everything externally facing? Good insurances are. Is it protected by multi-factor authentication? Which means I've got to steal not just your username and password, which is very easy because there's about 15 billion of them I can search every day when I do penetration tests. But now I need to also, root your phone and take over your phone, or social engineer and call you and say, hey, this is Patrick from IT. Is your computer slow? It's always slow, right? So when it's always slow, hey, can you help me? I'm Joe from IT trying to fix this up real quick. Okay, cool. Can you go to this URL? Can you enter this? Hey, did your token pop up on your phone? Yeah. What number is it? 643287. Oh,
Mhm.
okay. Yeah, I just pushed a new patch to your computer. If you could reboot it, it's probably going to make it a lot faster. We've had a lot of good reports. Oh, okay, cool. Bloop. They reboot, they hang up, they think nothing's happened, right? But in that
Mhm.
moment, they just got vished, right? Where we called them, used our voice, used our words, and said, hey, I'm just trying to help you out. And using a IT cover is very, very easy, especially as IT nerds, right? Because we know everyone's computer slow. We know they can have problems printing. And then, hey, how's your internet? Oh, it's terrible, right? So you can really lead people on with that. So with insurance, it will help you hopefully highlight like inferior backup solutions, multi-factor authentication, endpoint protection solutions, phishing solutions, training directives, kind of the core foundation. Because all these solutions are great, but if you still have people just clicking the things, then some of them can be completely bypassed, right? And that's where defense in depth comes in, where if you think about what cyber insurance questions are going to be about, if you don't answer yes to all those, the cost of cyber insurance goes up. I've seen it go from 20,000 to 200,000 at the same client in 1 year. And it was because they had no's on new questions that are very important. Do you have multi-factor on everything? Do you have immutable backups? Do you have offline backups? And they had to answer no on a couple of those things, and that raised the price. They called and said, hey, what if we answer yes? Oh, that'd save them $70,000 a year by hitting yes on that one thing. So your mileage is going to vary, but I think that's the good thing about cyber insurance right now is it's getting back to foundational stuff, right? Our bat belts are very accessorized right now with so many products and things in the IT space just to run the infrastructure, but then everything in that security umbrella, it's just complicated. And so I think cyber insurance highlights some of those big things. And if you do all those big things, you will be more secure, right? So that's what I like about it.
Yeah,
Luckily,
I
I don't
think
have to pay that kind of crazy amount of money, though.
I hear you. I hear you. And I do like everything you're describing. I think it does mean that people and organizations are going to be finally deploying what they should have all
Yeah.
along. But it's
Yep.
hard. I think it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But if you want any level of additional support from an insurance perspective,
Yep.
you definitely need to take those steps. So, you had mentioned immutable backups quite a few times.
Yeah.
What about like virtual air gapping, or what about like the ability to um, not be able to do a restore without approval, for example, from the backup side? Do you think those provide value as well?
Totally. Yeah. Any kind of vaulting, quorum, smart backup solution is very important when it comes to backups. Because if we look at some of the backups and some of the recent breaches, some of them have been related. LastPass, for example, was related to them even stealing the backups, right? And so, but they didn't just steal the backups that were already just not air gap, not protected that way. They stole the backups and the encryption keys for the backups, right? So they got the whole kit and caboodle, right? The chickens and the eggs. And so that is not what you want. And so you want to have a solution that has, if you have anything that can do with workflows, that you don't want someone just to randomly be spinning up a VM on Tuesday at 2 in the morning, right? Like, that's weird. And it's the SQL server, it's the file server. Why are we restoring that, right? Why wouldn't we would all know if the SQL server was broken or the file server, right? But it's
Right.
being restored or it's trying to be copied from one place to another or saved out. So yeah, it's very important, and I think that's where it's been fun for me is just over the years, backup solutions didn't really seem like any kind of security solution. They were always just business continuity. And now at the age of cryptocurrency and the way fraud can happen so much quicker, it is 100% undeniable a security product and a foundational one, because it may be the only thing left when all the other things have exploded and been encrypted and everything else. So the smarter the backup solution is, the better.
Yeah. So let's talk about security related products just in general. What are the most exciting ones that you're seeing out there that are helping companies?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, people getting upgraded backup solutions, right? Better solutions like from Cohesity and vendors like that. I think that's a big one. The next would be like more advanced EDRs, XDRs, MDRs. MDRs is probably the more common because what that does is it means that you might not be paying like the normal amount of money to have a SOC from whatever those vendors are, but you're getting someone or AI or ML is looking through those logs and going, hey, this is shady. I've never seen this log before, right? I've never seen someone try to log in and restore a server Tuesday at 2 a.m. in the morning, right? Something's going on. But I think my favorite is probably like some of the phishing protection stuff, because we know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is that most attacks are going to happen via the browser or your email or the combination of the two, right? I
Hmm.
get something that says bonuses 2023. I'm looking at my pay stub. I didn't get no bonus, right? I want to click on that. Who got a bonus, right? And so our it's just part of human nature, right? So when those things happen, that's where you went from your mail client to your browser, which are the top two most dangerous applications you can run. And some of the active phishing protection beyond just content filtering and scanning is really amazing. So there's kind of only one company that's really rocking that right now, and so they're really cool for doing it. Everyone else is trying to play catch up, which is always cool. I always love that in the tech scene, that here we are 30 plus years in the IT space, and there's still new verticals, new types of solutions being made, and that always excites me.
I agree. And for me in my career, while I spent a ton of time in the EUC and virtualization space, I was a long time Exchange admin. So I've deployed the products that filter out the email, the DNS systems, DKIM,
Hmm.
DMARC, et cetera, to make sure that you're trying to filter out as much as possible. But seeing that there are now products that are training and educating users on phishing attacks,
Yeah.
ongoing, simulating. I find that quite exciting.
Yeah,
I
for
geek
sure.
out on that a little bit as well,
Yeah.
just because it's definitely been part of most of my career. So
Yeah.
I'm glad to see it because it is, like you said, email, browsers, um, they go hand in hand. So anything we can do to keep that
Right. And
out.
that's one of those other new verticals is this enterprise browser space, right? Which is right now, if you're sitting in your jammies or at the office and you're listening to this, you may go, well, what kind of browser do you have? And you're like, I just have a browser. What? I've got like Edge and Chrome or Firefox on my computer or my virtual desktops, or all my users use Chrome. But what settings have been configured on Chrome to secure it? Well, none, right? There's no group policies applied. There's nothing to lock it down. And so that's where like companies like Citrix and Island and Talon and a couple others in this space have made enterprise browsers where I can give you a secure Chrome package with all the lockdown things. And you can still use it like a regular browser. So your YouTubes are still going to work, right? If you're allowed to YouTube through the day.
Mhm,
But it will also make sure that it's secure, right? So
mhm.
if you click on a link that goes to shadywebsite.com, it will not let you go there, right? If you're in a secure business application that is deemed sensitive, right? Payroll, HR, benefits, customer data, client data, you will have a watermark. It will not allow you to copy paste. It will not allow you to screen share and clone it and do all that. So there's lots of cool security features that even in Google, Beyond Corp, and a couple others have that they lock it down more than anything. And since we know it's a common attack avenue, it's a really, really cool space to see. And so I'm excited to see what that did. That's why I wrote a blog about it, because it was just very interesting to me thinking about all the security incidents that, quote, I've caused as a penetration tester, sending phishing emails and people clicking on it. The browser and the email was the way that it got there, right? And so if there's a better, smarter way to do some of that, like I'm all for it.
Yeah, for sure. What about like threat intelligence based scanning? What
Yep,
are your thoughts on being able to get better insights into which malware is attacking or what threat has impacted your
totally.
data?
Yeah, yeah. And that's where those fancier EDR solutions, or just not AV, like MDR, where it's managed detection and response, really start shining. But I think one of the best things that people can do is there's paid solutions and a couple free solutions if you want to do a DIY arts and crafts project. But you can make a scanner in your deployment, and you can scan all your VLANs and subnets. And what you should end up with is I have 1,000 things in Active Directory, and then I have 1,613 things that I scanned. What are those 613 things? Well, I don't know. Well, there's a whole bunch of copy machines, there's a whole bunch of printers, there's a whole bunch of switches, there's a whole bunch of management interfaces, there's the virtualization host, there's this thing, there's this IoT thermometer over here and a thermostat over there. So you'll start finding out what your baseline is so that you can know that also what's not getting patched. That's probably the most important thing of threat intelligence, because it's so easy when you've got 10,000, 100,000, even 1,000 devices, and you can only ever really successfully patch 70, 80% of them weekly when new things come out. That leaves a big gap for anyone to land on one of those systems that's vulnerable and do bad things, right? And so when you have vulnerability scanning happening in your deployment on a regular basis, well, now you know server 26 didn't do it. Well, what do we do if we're the server 26 admin? First thing, just like IT crowd, have you tried turning it off and back on again? Right? We'll give it a restart. And sometimes that's all it needed to get the patches going again. And now that system's not vulnerable. But when we look at like domain controllers and file servers and database servers, those are usually, and other application servers, usually the most critical things. And if they're not getting patched, you could have a bad day. It could be a real day wrecker. So having a good vulnerability scan that's going monthly, weekly, however often. And then that's where, like, Google had a big art remote code execution vulnerability last week, and that's already stirred around the world. And what's really funny is I work with a couple of clients at different SOCs, and I've been getting emails for the past week, a couple days after that announcement. So I've got one of them today about something that happened way last week, and it's a critical vulnerability remote code execution exploit in the wild. But that just goes to show you that depending on the SOCs and everything else, you might not hear about these things. This is where social media and RSS feeds are still very important for you to have. And then we don't like mailing lists, but they can also save your bacon. So threat intelligence comes in more than just a product. It's also people in your deployment being in tune with, hey, what do we have? Well, we've got Microsoft Windows, we've got this version of Linux, and we have Chrome, we have Microsoft Office, we have SAP, we have Cognos, we have all these other applications and packages. Well, when we hear news about something happening with one of those, we should be running to the hills.
Well, and it seems like threat intelligence comes in many different flavors of detection. You listed off many, so I think it's really interesting to step back and think about. Let's talk about data classification and how that fits into all of this.
Yeah, I think the first part of data classifications usually goes all the way back to the quote backup plan, the DR, the BC, the RTOs, the RPOs. How quick can we restore it, and what do we restore first? Right. So that's the tiering of applications usually first, right? This server, this firewall are tier 0. These are tier 1. These are tier 2. And then also when we get past those systems, then that's where data classification starts happening to make sure that if this is sensitive data, that it's backed up and retained and accessed, and your file shares don't have everyone full control, because I see that all the time. Everyone full control on the HR file share. I think bonuses 2023 is not going to be safe, right? So you've got to be careful with that. So I think data classification is really important because you need to know what's in those different types of data. Because if you don't know when something bad happens and it's server X and you don't even know what server X did, you've got a big problem when it comes to incident response. Because when the general counsel of your company is like, hey, what was on that box? I think a little doodad and a thingamabob, right? Like, I don't know. Was there customer data? A definite maybe, not sure. But, so those things are going to cause problems. So you want to know where that sensitive data is, what type of data, and the number, the structure. It's 3 digits, 2 digits, 3 digits, or it's 4 digits, 4 digits, 4 digits, 4 digits, right? Credit cards. So you need to know that. And classification is very important for incident response and for your backup solution.
Yeah, and I think when you consider incident response and the risk of data exfiltration once a hacker's made its way in, I think understanding what could be vulnerable or even proactively locking that down because you found it in advance of an attack, like you said, the HR share should not be wide open. And so if you can limit the risk, even with permissions well in advance of an attack, it hopefully minimizes the risk even more.
Agreed. I mean, sometimes, ignorance is bliss, but knowing is half the battle if we're going to go down the G.I. Joe road, right? So knowing that you've got a file share that has bad permissions, or you haven't patched the system, or you don't have these backups in a way that they actually restore, or, anyone can restore on a Tuesday, then those are things you can fix, right? And sometimes I think the hardest part with any IT admin is the frustration that builds is when you want to do these things, but the business isn't behind you, right? And you feel like you're just like a cog in the machine and no one's asking or answering your call for oil to make it run better, right? So it's a big deal.
Yep. All right. So a little bit of not fun for the person on the receiving end of this, but if you had to make a prediction, what would be the next big attack of this year? So just one. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen every year, every operating system and almost every piece of software has a really nasty bug, right? So it's kind of all across the board. But I think my biggest thing that I think would happen is that there's going to be another shared library or thing, kind of like what Log4j was just, 2 years ago. Right over Christmas was a great time for us, right? As IT people, we're all trying to do nerdy things and play with our kids and open up presents. And it was like, hey, do you have Log4j? I'd never even heard of it, right? So I think there's going to be another shared product library like that that's going to be taken over by malicious actors or code injected that is malicious onto all those systems. I think that'll be the big thing.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. I hope there's not a next big attack, but it is always interesting to ponder.
Yep.
So, all right. So, how about one parting question? In terms of cyber insurance, what's just one key takeaway from you for the audience today?
I think the biggest takeaway is have one for sure, right? Have something, even if it's lower coverage. But then if it's not asking you 10 or 20 questions, you probably want to look for other insurance, right? Because if they're not being thorough about vetting you, like getting your driving history, if you're getting a license, you're a 17-year-old and you have 42 crashes, yeah, it's going to cost a couple $1,000s a month to insure your Toyota Corolla, right? Whereas if you've been driving for a while and you can prove that you've been driving for a while with no crashes, no tickets, all that, so that's where those good cyber insurance companies come from, then that's the thing you want. So it could be time to reevaluate or at least get it is probably the big thing I would say.
Wonderful advice. So, Patrick, always a pleasure doing work with you. Loved our conversation today. Thank you so much for sharing your cyber insurance thoughts.
No problem. It was great. Thank you.
Yep. And that concludes our most recent episode of Spotlight on Security Tech Insights.
All right. Later, Gators.